Have you ever wondered what it's like to be caught in the midst of a breaking news event? The chaos, the adrenaline, the sheer unpredictability of it all? Well, let me take you behind the scenes of a day that began like any other, in a bustling newsroom, but quickly spiraled into something far more dramatic. On this day, the newsroom was a hive of activity. The phone was ringing off the hook, and every staff member was engrossed in their tasks, assigned by their radio and television heads. Will de Hortop, one of the key figures in the newsroom, had asked Frank to handle the market affairs and maintain contact with Roland, their key source, as long as it was feasible. The news of the day had shocked them all. An attack that was comparable in its magnitude to the Twin Towers or a subway bombing. Output. Our cameramen, Geertje and Graatje, usually accustomed to capturing footage of flea markets and festive gatherings, were the first on the scene. They had been sent by Will immediately after receiving confirmation from Frank that the area was safe enough for filming. The advantage here was that they were already present downtown before the police cordoned off the area. Geertje was capturing footage of the Movavi, a cultural music center, for some filler shots for the news, while Graatje was covering a local politician's farewell reception. Christopher de Porter, who had been stationed in the city hall and following the shooting via a line he had maintained, was informed about the presence of both cameramen and immediately set to work with them to get the footage on the air as soon as possible. It was a stroke of luck that the city had recently agreed to the setting up of a permanent studio in one of the rooms of the Grand City Hall. This arrangement benefited both parties. The politicians could relay their messages to the public faster, and the Friday afternoon political hour broadcasts had a loyal listenership. Christopher hadn't seen the attack when it happened, but he knew that if he had live footage, it would likely have been a world exclusive. His awareness of the scale of the incident only came when the first victims, screaming in abject terror, ran across the market towards the city hall. Through one of the windows of his small studio, Christopher saw a man kneeling next to a little girl he'd just laid on the city hall steps, holding something in his hand that looked like a doll's arm. Geert and Graatje, like seasoned war correspondents, began capturing what they would later describe as the most horrifying yet exhilarating experience of their careers as volunteer cameramen. In summary, this day in the newsroom was a testament to the unpredictability of the news industry, the importance of having a capable team ready to respond, and the sheer intensity of being on the front lines of a breaking news event. Despite the chaos and horror, it was a day that demonstrated the resilience and adaptability of those who bring the news to us daily.
Imagine this, a bustling city suddenly shaken by a horrifying act of violence. The citizens, previously going about their day, are now in a state of shock and confusion. This isn't a scene from a movie, but a chilling reality that unfolded in a city where Frank and Peter, two dedicated news broadcasters, were tasked with the grave responsibility of keeping the populace informed. It began as a regular day. Frank and Peter were live on air, providing the public with useful information. The call team was in action, sharing vital details about the unfolding situation and the procedures to follow. The city's mayor, Rombouts, condemned the act vehemently over a phone call, pledging to do everything possible to bring the perpetrators to justice. He implored the listeners to stay tuned to the local broadcast, praising the calm and composed reporting. But as the day wore on, the situation began to escalate. Around 8 o'clock, disturbing reports began to emerge from the Gemaakt and Graafschelwijk districts. Clashes were breaking out between various groups of native and immigrant youths, and reports of fires at youth centers added to the chaos. The local law enforcement, with support from neighboring forces, started cordoning off these areas, drawing on their past experiences from the Graafschelwijk riots. Amidst the chaos, a beacon of courage emerged: Roland. Arriving at the studio a few minutes earlier, his arrival was met with thunderous applause. His role in the initial hours after the attack had been crucial. Despite admitting to having been terrified, he maintained that it was this fear that had kept him sharp. Roland's coverage of the aftermath was both haunting and poignant, painting a picture of a city in shock. The number of victims suffering from shock was staggering, and many witnesses were so traumatized that they struggled to recall exactly what had transpired. Frank, meanwhile, couldn't help but feel immense pride for Roland's performance under such extreme circumstances. Roland's initial words from the scene were etched into his memory. Dear listeners, from my vantage point at the market bus stop, I'm looking at what must have been a horrendously spectacular scene. A gray smoke-filled sky, rubble and dispersed figures laying in unnatural positions. The events of the day were a stark reminder of the power of media in times of crisis, and the courage required to report on such traumatic events. Frank, Peter, and Roland's dedication to their roles as broadcasters was a testament to their commitment and bravery. Despite the horror, they continued to keep their listeners informed, offering a beacon of hope in the midst of chaos.
The flames of frustration spread across cities, with hundreds arrested, including conspiracy theorists and far-right sympathizers. These riots were more than just mindless violence. They were a physical manifestation of a deep-seated sense of loss of control. The turbulence coincided with a political crisis, adding fuel to the fire. While some saw the riots as a form of protest, others viewed them as an expression of anger and frustration. Psychological experts attributed the unrest to a need for belonging and control. Meanwhile, experts suggested understanding the protesters' perspective to prevent further escalation. Fast forward to a few months later, the riots had spread to other cities like Rotterdam, Utrecht, Amsterdam, and Deventer. The scenes were reminiscent of a battlefield as different groups clashed in epic brawls. The government, in a bid to control the situation, set up a national crisis team in The Hague, led by then Prime Minister Balkenende. Minister Remkes urged the citizens to remain calm and stay indoors. He warned that if the situation continued to deteriorate, a state of emergency would be declared, introducing a curfew. In the midst of this turmoil, people sought solace in the objective analysis of the situation by individuals like Peter, who provided a clear overview of the unfolding events. However, the grim reality of the situation hit home for many, like Tom, who was jolted out of his peaceful evening by the sounds of explosions. The consensus was clear. The nation was in the throes of what seemed like a small coup. The right wing was gaining momentum, and the narratives confirmed the worst fears. The riots were now a national issue, and the police were enforcing a zero-tolerance policy. In summary, the riots in the Netherlands were an eruption of pent-up frustration and a cry for control amidst political uncertainty. In the face of such chaos, the government and the citizens grappled with the need for peace and understanding. The question remains, was it too late? The power of the people is undeniable, but the consequences of such power, when left unchecked, can be catastrophic. Whether it's through peaceful protests or violent riots, the voice of the people will always find a way to be heard. But at what cost? Only time can tell.
Imagine this, Suzanne, a woman deeply in love, concocting a delightful surprise for her beloved Stephen. Picture her, embarking on a journey to Tilburg, her heart full of anticipation and excitement. She knew Stephen was at work, and she had a plan. A plan to borrow the key to his apartment from his unsuspecting neighbor and, in turn, surprise Stephen with a delectable meal. A meal so mouth-watering, a feast of flavors, one of her favorite recipes, a savory broccoli tart a la Susie. With the key in hand, Suzanne enters the apartment, oblivious to the mysterious smile of the neighbor. Love can indeed blind us to the subtlest signs. She starts her culinary masterpiece, spreading out the ingredients on the kitchen counter, preheating the oven, and immersing herself in the comforting familiarity of cooking. As she slices and cleans the ingredients, the oven hums with heat, ready to bake her labor of love. A little under an hour, and it would be ready. With the table set and the radio chattering in the background, Suzanne pours herself a glass of whiskey, a moment of tranquility before the surprise. Suddenly, the radio news hits her like a freight train. She freezes, her heart pounding, glued to her chair. The oven timer snaps her back to reality. She pulls out the tart, its heavenly aroma filling the room. Suzanne knows Stephen usually gets home around 8, so she covers the tart with foil, preserving its warmth. She uncorks a bottle of Spanish red wine, giving it ample time to breathe. In half an hour, he would be home. She envisions the evening ahead, snuggling against his broad chest, savoring his masculinity. A laugh escapes her as she settles down with one of his psychology books, waiting for his arrival. Around 8:30, she hears a commotion at the front door. Stephen's voice, tense and irate, filters through the apartment, followed by a deeper, unfamiliar voice. This wasn't the calm and composed Stephen she knew. The door swings open, and Stephen walks in, his eyes wide with surprise at the sight before him. "Hello, Suzanne," he says, his eyes holding an unfamiliar look. He seems distant, his gaze almost piercing through her. The room fills with an eerie silence, the tantalizing aroma of the tart hanging heavily in the air. And then, the video ends, leaving us wondering, what could possibly be next?